It still baffles me how the NHL let this prospect slip to the 5th round. This guy honestly might be one of the biggest steals in NHL history. This Habs prospect honestly is making so many NHL GMs look stupid for not taking him. Hello guys, welcome back. My name is Nathan, and today we're going to be taking a look at 10 recent NHL draft picks that are starting to look like absolute steals. Now, a few months ago, I did a video basically looking at 10 recent draft picks that are starting to look like busts. Now we're going to take a much more optimistic view and look at some of the biggest steals over the past few seasons. But who do I see as the biggest steals over the past few drafts? Does your favorite NHL team have a big steal? And which big steals make today's top 10? Watch till the end for every single pick and all the prospect talk, and make sure you hit that subscribe button if you are new. 60% of the people that are watching are not subscribed. If you like hockey and if you like prospect talk, this channel is the place to be. Now, we're going to start off today's video with an absolute bang, and we're going to start out at number 1 and the first recent NHL draft pick that is looking like an absolute steal. At number 1, we're going to start out with a Montreal Canadiens draft pick, and I do want to say that for the rules today, I'm not counting first rounders, and I'm only counting the 2017 through the 2021 NHL drafts as recent NHL drafts, so there you go. But we're going to move on to a second round pick back in 2018 by the Montreal Canadiens, 38th overall, which is just looking absolutely amazing. This second round pick was acquired from the Chicago Blackhawks, and it's turned out pretty good. We're going to move on to number 1 and the first recent player to look like a steal in Alexander Romanov. Now, Alexander Romanov is a very interesting one. At the time, I thought it was a decent pick. It had some good upside, but I didn't really know how good it really would turn out for Montreal, and it was a risk at the time for sure. But Romanov has definitely had a great turnaround since then, and now is a big part of the Canadiens going forward. Didn't have the greatest first season in the world, dealt with some big inconsistencies, but he's a big part of that decor going forward and could be their number 1 defenseman in a few years' time. But is a big part of that Habs core, that young core, and is one of the best defensive prospects in the league right now. But considering the fact that in his draft year, Romanov was kind of a middling prospect in the MHL, it's turned out pretty good for him and turned out pretty good for the Montreal Canadiens too. But we're now going to move on to the second NHL recent draft pick that is starting to look like an absolute steal, and especially this year has turned the page. You guys know my favorite team is the Dallas Stars, but I don't think there's any bias in this pick whatsoever. He is looking absolutely amazing. We're going to go on to the 39th overall pick instead of the 38th overall pick and go to the 2017 NHL draft where the Dallas Stars, 39th overall, selected Jason Robertson. Now, going back to his draft year, the biggest concern was really with Jason Robertson skating. That was pretty much it, and that was the main block that really kept him from the first round. But we can obviously tell since then that the skating hasn't been much of a problem. It's not maybe a strength in his game, but he's definitely improved it in a vast amount of areas, and his offensive game has been just elite for Dallas. As a Stars fan, watching him this last year was an absolute treat, and at 22 years old, he's going to be so good. But this last year, in 51 NHL games, got 17 goals, 28 assists for 45 points, and was truly just an elite player in almost every single way. In play driving, in terms of excitement, he was really driving a lot of the Dallas Stars offense alongside Rupe Hintz and Joe Pavelski, but he was so good for a rookie and deserved all the credit that he eventually got. But considering that Jason Robertson got 81 points in 68 games in the OHL in his draft year, I don't think the skating was too much of a problem even in the first place, and he's definitely taken a major stride as he should have. But now we're going to move on to number 3 and the third recent NHL draft pick that is looking like an absolute steal. This is a player that just got locked up to a long-term contract with his team and has been a big part of the core and the young core over the past couple of years. We're going to move on to the 23-year-old winger back in the 2017 NHL draft, 4th round, 121st overall by the Ottawa Senators, and we're going to move on to Drake Batherson. Now, Drake Batherson has been a super interesting prospect. He played in the QMJHL back in his draft year, where he got 58 points in 61 games, and some of the concerns around Batherson was his potential transition onto the pro game, how successful and consistent that would be, but the skill was always there with Batherson. It was just if you translate it to the pro level, and I think he has so far. In the AHL, the NHL, wherever he's went, he's gotten better and better, and now at age 23, he's been sensational for the Ottawa Senators. This past year, got 34 points points, 17 goals, 17 assists for 56 games played. And even though the points might not be as good as like a Robertson per se, he was just great and consistent for the Sens the entire season. And I think that will translate onto the next few seasons as well. He's a big part of that Sens team going forward though, and at 121st overall, it's definitely one of the best value picks the Sens have really ever made. But now moving on to the fourth recent NHL draft pick that is starting to look like an absolute steal. This is a player that I've had my eyes on for a long time. Even before he was drafted, I knew he should have gone in the top 25 back in the 2019 draft. He ended up slipping to 53rd overall in 2019 to the Toronto Maple Leafs, and we're going to move on to number 4 in Nicholas Robertson. Now, to me, Nicholas Robertson was always a guy that was pretty underrated. He's obviously a small forward at 5'9", and he was a guy that in his draft year I was pretty excited about. Going back to the 2019 season where in 54 games for the Peterborough Petes, he got 55 points, 27 goals, 28 assists. I thought this was a guy that in terms of talent, in terms of consistency offensively, was a really great product, and I eventually had him top 25 in my draft rankings. I knew he would slip to the second round, but 53rd overall was really rich to me, and since then he's proved a lot of the doubters wrong. He's not quite at that established NHL player ranking yet, but this is a guy that in terms of goal scoring, in terms of offensive talent, has so much to that is almost impossible for him to not make the NHL, I personally think. I think it's just a matter of time before he makes that transition, and I think it's just a matter of time before that 53rd overall pick looks a lot more of a steal than it even is right now. The Leafs got a great player and a great pick in the second round. But next up at number 5, we're going to move on to a starter of the future for the team that drafted him and a great goalie, even now, that I think could step into the NHL and be good. This was a player that was drafted in the 4th round, 111th overall, back in 2017. And we're going to move on to the Boston Bruins 4th round pick in Jeremy Swayman. Now, back in his draft year, Jeremy Swayman was a pretty big unknown. He was good in the USHL, but not quite good enough to be considered a great prospect. He got a .914 save percentage in 32 games played, but would eventually move on to the NCAA for the University of Maine, and that's where he really started to take off in his freshman year. Got a .921 save percentage in 31 games played, and would continue to get better and better, eventually getting called up for the Boston Bruins, signing with them, being great in the regular season, being solid in the playoffs, and now being a big part of that goalie future for Boston. And even though Ullmark is the starter right now, I think Swayman could still be the backup and be a very serviceable player, which for how young he is, I think is a pretty big accomplishment. But this is a guy that has great work ethic, great talent, and I think he'll eventually be a starter in the NHL. But now we're going to move on to number 6, and just like Nicholas Robertson, there was another winger in the 2019 draft that I thought was severely underrated, and I think was severely underrated in the draft as well. I ended up ranking him 15th overall, and he eventually went 40th overall to the Vancouver Canucks. We're going to move on to number 6 and move on to Nils Hoglander. Now, to me, Nils Hoglander is definitely one of the biggest second-round steals we've seen over the past few seasons. This is a guy that was just commandingly good with the Canucks in his first season, on a team that pretty much with everybody else suffered inconsistency and just poor play. Hoglander really rose to the occasion and played, simply put, his best hockey. And at the current moment, he's still 20 years old. He ended up being, of course, selected 40th overall back in the 2019 draft. But in his rookie season, he was just really good for the Canucks, getting 27 points, 13 goals, 14 assists for 56 points. And I think he would have had a lot more points if other guys like Batherson and Quinn Hughes were completely healthy. But the Canucks were almost just crumbling around him, but Hoglander was still playing great. I think that's a metaphor for the rest of his career in Vancouver. I think he will be a great player for them, though, and a huge part of that young core going forward. All I ask, Jim Benning, is that you actually sign him. But now moving on to number 7, we're going to go to probably the most recent NHL draft steal, going back to the 2020 NHL draft, and when I saw where this guy was drafted, I knew it would look bad for a lot of different teams. I think this Habs prospect is honestly going to make a lot of teams look foolish in the future, but we're going to move on to the 124th overall pick back in the 2020 NHL draft, back in the 4th round, and move on to Sean Farrell. Now, to me, Sean Farrell was a pretty under-the-radar guy in the 2020 draft. I had him in the 2nd round. I thought he was a good prospect, but to go in the 4th round was pretty astonishing to me, and he was just elite in the USHL this last season, to put it lightly. In 53 USHL games for the Chicago Steel, he got 29 goals, 72 assists for 101 points. He was practically the Connor McDavid of the USHL this last year, but he's going to be going to Harvard University this next year too, which I think is going to be great for his development. This is a guy that's not yet proved it in the NHL, but I think eventually will, and as a 4th round pick to get that type of talent is astonishing for the Habs. But now we can move on to number 8, and this is also a pretty high draft pick in the second round. We're going to move on to the 2020 second round here, 38th overall, and move on to the San Jose Sharks selection in Thomas Bordeleau. Now, I'm going to be the first to say that I was not the biggest fan of Thomas Bordeleau back in his draft year. I thought there was a guy that suffered from big inconsistencies, rather poor defensive play for a centerman, and I really wasn't sure how he would transition onto the NCAA game. But he translated about as good as he possibly could for the University of Michigan, and it was fantastic for them this last year, getting 8 goals, 22 assists, 30 points in 24 games, winning Rookie of the Year in the NCAA, and just being a force to be reckoned with throughout the whole season. This is a guy, though, that improved majorly on some of those defensive issues, and although they aren't corrected completely, this is a guy that has a good overall offensive foundation, and I think will be a big part of the Sharks going forward, and I think even has the potential to be a top 6 centerman. And for a 38th overall pick, that's quite good. But now moving on to number 9, this might be the latest draft pick on this list, going to the 5th round, 141st overall, back in the 2018 NHL draft. We're going to move on to the New Jersey Devils pick back in 2018, and move on to Yegor Sharangovich. Now, Sharangovich, the Belarusian prospect, is looked at as one of the greater younger players on New Jersey, but back in 2018, it wasn't always the case. He had a good KHL season, and would immediately transition onto the AHL game, where he'd start making a big impact at the pro level once again. He would eventually play his first season in the NHL this past year, where he was great alongside Jack Hughes and Yanni Kakkonen, getting 30 points, 16 goals, 14 assists in 54 games played. But I think what Sharangovich showed was super important. This is a guy that can have some great impact, some great overall play, and really lead a line in a lot of different key areas. But when it comes to Sharangovich, he kind of came out of nowhere to become this great up-and-coming player, and he's going to be a big part of the Devils franchise for a very long time. But now we can officially go on to number 10 in the 10th big draft steal that is looking like an absolute stud. We're going to move on to a draft pick back in the 2020 NHL draft. And I know it is a little bit early to be judging prospects right now, even a Sean Farrell, but this is a guy that made about as big of a jump as you could have possibly ever hoped. With the CHL allowing some players to go to the AHL, this guy took big advantages of that. We're going to move on to the 94th overall pick in the 2020 draft, 4th round, by the Philadelphia Flyers, and move on to my boy, Zayde Wisdom. To me, Zayde Wisdom is honestly the most underrated prospect in hockey right now. Not a lot of credit gets shown to just how much improvements and how much great player there has been over the past couple of seasons. I really liked him in the OHL in his draft year, where I thought he was a great, tenacious, hardworking winger, but this is a guy that's taken that next step, and this past year playing the AHL as an 18-year-old, just being honestly quite great, getting in 28 games, getting 7 goals, 11 assists for 18 points, and this is a guy that was super young and had some doubts if he'd transition onto the pro game, but at age 18 and 19, he was already a great player and really showed his skills quite nicely, especially in the first half of the AHL season. This is a guy, though, that I'm super proud of. I had a super high in my draft rankings, and I think will be a big part of that Flyers' future for a very long time. But there are honestly so many other draft steals that I could have mentioned in today's video that didn't quite make the cut. Prospects like Nils Hoglander, 64th overall by the Habs. Prospects like Riley Demany, 137th by the Dallas Stars. Other prospects like Jonathan Bergeron, 33rd overall back in 2018, which I think are pretty great picks. Another reason why I didn't want to include first round picks too was because they would honestly bloat the entire list, because I could go through so many first round picks that were definite steals and should have been drafted higher. Guys like Josh Norris, just outside the top 15. Even players in the top 10, like a Trevor Zegras 9th overall, or a Kel McCarr overall, or an Elias Pettersson 5th overall. A lot of prospects in the first round that should have been drafted higher that I didn't really want to include as steals, technically, in today's video, but there are a lot out there, and honestly, there is a ton to choose from. So if I missed any of them, let me know in the comments down below. But these, I think, are 10 super strong steals over the past few years, and there is a lot of quality, especially in the 4th through 5th rounds. A lot to look forward to, and a lot of great talents, and a lot of diamonds in the rough that ended up being uncovered, thankfully, because we got some great more talents coming in the NHL because of it. But that'll be it for today, guys. Thank you so much for watching. If you did enjoy, make sure you hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, and hit that notification bell if you've not already. Comment down below, what do you think about my steal picks? What do you agree and disagree with? Who do you think is the biggest steal on this list? And who would you as well include in this top 10? Let me know your thoughts. Of course, make sure you share this video with your friends. Get it out there to any hockey fans you know online, wherever it might be. And click on this card for all my hockey rankings content right in one playlist. My name is Nathan. Have a great day, and I'll see you in the next one. Goodbye.